Hey guys, welcome to Frytech channel. In this video, I want to talk to you about which Apple laptops you could and should buy right now and essentially how to navigate all of the options that Apple provides right now. So this is a budget conscious guide and I will be dividing it into several price brackets, essentially below $1,000, between $1,000 and $1,500, $1,500 to $2,000, and anything above $2,000. We're gonna be operating with US dollars just for the convenience sake. Check your local prices. In this video, I'm gonna be mostly talking about M series of chips, so chips that Apple designed, that is M1, M2, M3 generation, and their respective upgraded versions, Pro and Max models. M4 chips are right around the corner, maybe in a few months they will be announced, but computers with those chips will be much pricier than we're gonna be mostly operating today. And I doubt that they will be that much faster than the chips already present on the market. All the Macs that I'm gonna be talking about today are plenty enough for most of use cases. They will be able to handle most of the tasks that you're going to be throwing at them. Okay, a few disclaimers up front. First of all, do not buy under any circumstances Intel MacBooks anymore. They're hot, their support is being discontinued, and chips that Apple designed themselves, M series of chips, even the oldest one, even like M1 generation, not even Pro, it's good chip and it is plenty powerful for like a lot of tasks. And Apple designed those chips to have a neural engine inside of it, to have like a media engine, so like newest powerful features essentially that Apple continues to have with newer and newer generations of chips were already present essentially right at the beginning, right at the introduction of Apple M series. The next disclaimer is that Apple provides right now a lot of options in terms of display size. You have 13-inch, you have 14-inch, 15, 16. I cannot tell you which one you should go for. I will make a few suggestions as we go through this video, but if you want to know for yourself, visit your local Apple store or just like a big electronics store and find these MacBooks and actually take a look at them, type on them and just like look at the display, pick it up in your hands and like compare like the weight and like display size and everything. The decision about the display size is up to you. I will make my recommendations and I will tell you which one I would buy, but like I'm saying, essentially it is up to you. One more thing to keep in mind is that there are binned versions of chips. What it means is that lower SKUs that Apple sells for like the cheapest price are essentially like defective, and so Apple disables some certain parts of the chips and sells them at lower price essentially. Don't be too worried. What it means is just that a certain CPU block or certain GPU block didn't essentially qualify, didn't pass quality control of Apple, and so these blocks were disabled and they went as a lower SKUs, lower tier models essentially. It doesn't mean that your CPU or your system on a chip is defective or anything like that. It just means that certain blocks are disabled, so it is essentially less powerful. I will mention it as we go along, but just keep in mind that not all the chips are created equal and you need to kind of pay a little bit more attention how many cores are there in a chip, especially when we go to slightly higher models when you will be paying essentially more money, so you kind of want full version of chips essentially. There are a lot of deals out there on Amazon or on other places, but there are especially a lot of deals if you're willing to buy your computer used. So I'm actually recommending you to go for a used option. In fact, my next video will be a guide how to buy a used Apple computer and not get screwed. Essentially what to check, what to look out for. So make sure to subscribe to Frytech channel so you don't miss this video. I will put a link to that video into the description section and also into pinned comment. So watch that video before you actually go and buy your MacBook. One more thing to keep in mind is that depending on the processor, you will have a different amount of monitors that you can connect to your MacBooks. So for example, with just a regular generation, with M generation, M1, M2, M3, basic model of processor, right? You will be able only connect one external monitor. Keep this in mind. With Pro generation, you can connect up to 2 monitors, and with Max generation, you can connect up to 4 monitors. So if this is something important to you, make sure that you buy in the right model. Also, some applications like Final Cut Pro, for example, and others, I'm assuming, can utilize extra, essentially like media encoding engines of Max series of chips, hence speeding up your like video exports, for example. So if you are editing or if you're planning to edit a lot of videos, for example, maybe you want to start YouTube channel, or maybe you want to teach online, things like that, probably Max series of chips will be your best option because it will speed up your workflow. And since that whole sort of media encoding, decoding engines didn't really change that much between like M1, M2, M3 generations of chips, essentially you'd be better off going with M1 Max chips rather than M3 Pro, for example. But I'm gonna be talking about it a little bit later in the video. So with this out of the way, let's just jump right into the main portion of the video. So the first price bracket, below $1,000. Here we're gonna be mostly looking at MacBook Air, even the original MacBook Air with M1 series of chips, as well as upgraded and redesigned MacBook Air with like M2 or M3 even series of processors. In fact, I would actually create here like a subcategory below $700 if you are operating on a really strict budget, if you don't want or if you cannot spend too much money really, but you still want to have some kind of an Apple experience and preferably decent at that. I would 100% go for original, cheapest MacBook Air with M1 chip. Right now you can find a lot of them around like $500, $600, $700, and it is still an absolutely capable and really good computer. There are even MacBook Pros, but with all design with a touch bar essentially. And while I don't really recommend it since it's got like a touch bar, if you don't terribly mind that abomination, you can actually go for that computer as well. For example, I would probably still choose MacBook Air. Whether it is an old one or a redesigned one, I would probably go for a redesigned one, but once again, it all depends on the price. What I wouldn't recommend is to buy 8 GB of RAM and 256 SSD model. So essentially the cheapest and sort of the most low spec model that Apple basically ever sold. And that's mainly due to the fact that those SSDs on those low spec models are quite slow, and because you have only 8 gigs of RAM, it means that essentially the computer will be taking things out of the RAM quite often actually and putting it onto SSD, thus wearing down your SSD but also slowing it down. So if you copy pasting some files onto SSD while the computer uses swap as it's called, so taking some stuff from the RAM and putting it onto SSD to access it later essentially. And like I'm saying, if you're copying at the same time something, it will slow down your SSD and by extension slow down your computer. And you might be thinking, whoa, I just spent like $500-$700 on Apple's cool M series of chips, but my computer is still slow. And this is because of this, because of the slow SSD and not enough RAM. I just want you to know and be aware of this situation. If you fully understand what you're getting into, if for example, maybe you're buying this computer for your study, for your university, for example, and most of the things that you're going to be doing, like typing text and making like presentations, things like that, maybe occasional video here and there, then it's kind of okay. But I just want you to understand and know fully well what you're getting into. Also at this price, and since we are talking about basically MacBook Air, spare some money for a dongle, for a good dongle, because you'll need it, because there is no SD card, because there is no HDMI, things like that, no USB-A port, in case you might need that kind of a port. So reserve some money for that. If you can spend a little bit more money, I would probably go for M2 generation of MacBook Air, since there are still quite a lot of discounts right now on those MacBooks, because there is a MagSafe right now, so you can charge it separately without taking up space in just 2 USBs that Apple gives us. I actually remember when Apple was selling MacBook Air with SD card slot, with USBs, and it was perfectly capable computer, but apparently marketing and artificial segmentation team at Apple is still winning. So to have even an SD card slot, absolute basics, you need to upgrade to a Pro model. One thing I want you to consider is that if you see that your MacBook Air is getting quite expensive already, especially if it's like a 15-inch model, maybe it's time to look at MacBook Pro. By the way guys, if you already find this video helpful and educational, please subscribe to Frytech channel, I would really appreciate it. So our next price bracket is from $1,000 to $1,500. So in the price bracket, MacBook Pro 14-inch with M1 Pro processor is the king. Sometimes you can also find MacBook Pro 16-inch at this price bracket, but 14-inch model is more prevalent. At this price range, you will see some MacBook Airs with upgraded RAM and SSD, for example, but I would steer away from those computers because MacBook Pro is just a way better computer. And because their base configuration started with 16 gigs of RAM and 512 SSD, that's just the standard that they were arranged with up until MacBook Pro M3, but we're gonna talk about that atrocity in just a few moments. That means that you will find a lot more of these models already on the market. Do not buy MacBook Air 15-inch because comparatively speaking, compared to MacBook Pro 14, it's a way worse computer, and the screen difference is not that big. All while with MacBook Pro you will get great 120Hz display. So if you've ever used iPad Pro or like latest iPhones, you know that high refresh rate, it's really pleasing to eyes, it's really pleasing to like move around and all that kind of stuff. Then it is an HDR display, so it's way brighter, and with like $10 or $20 app you can get 1000 nits of sustained brightness on like full display, which is absolutely stellar if you need to go outside or something like that. You get all the ports, USB-C/Thunderbolt, you get SD card slot, you get HDMI. It's just overall a way better computer. And it will be faster too, because it will have M1 Pro chip, not just M2 chip. Here's again where discussion about binned and unbinned version returns essentially. I'll put on the screen all the different sort of variations of Apple's chips that there are. Just keep in mind when you're searching, you know, make sure that you are searching, for example, especially if you go up the price, if you're getting closer to $1,500, make sure that you're getting full 10-core CPU and full 16-core GPU if we are talking about M1 Pro chip, not the binned 8 and 14 cores respectively version. There are also binned versions of Max chips. Once again, make sure that you know about it, make sure that you're getting for the full version, or if you are getting a lower spec version, at least you're getting it at a fair price, at a very good price essentially. At this price range, if you can find like a 16 gigs of RAM and like 1 terabyte model, great. If you can go for like 32 1 terabyte, great. If you can find like a 32 2 terabyte model, that's absolutely exceptional. Go for it. It's gonna be an absolutely great computer. And so here's how you should operate in this price bracket. If you decided that 14-inch display is good enough of a size for you, I would go as follows. So the base config is 16 gigs of RAM and 512 of SSD. First of all, I would be searching for bigger SSD. If you can get to 1 terabyte, great. If you can get to 2 terabyte, even better. And then I would search for max model before, and this is crucial, before I would upgrade to a newer generation. So before I go from M1 Pro series of chips to like M2 Pro or even M3 Pro, I would first try to find M1 Max chips. And this is the logic that we're gonna follow throughout this whole video essentially. First you go for M1 Pro, you try to see if you can get for this amount of money that you have more storage or bigger RAM and more storage. If you can satisfy those criteria, try to upgrade from Pro processor to Max processor, especially if you're doing like video editing, if you are doing some 3D work, things like that. The upgrade from M1 Pro to M1 Max will be more beneficial to you than switching to a newer generation of chips. Unless, and here's a little trick how Apple gets you essentially. If you want to connect 4K 120Hz display via HDMI, you need to upgrade from M1 generation to M2 Pro, M2 Max generation of chips. Because with M2 Pro and Max generations, you're getting HDMI 2.1, which is capable of those higher essentially refresh rates and higher resolution. At M1 Pro generation, you can only do 4K 60 via HDMI, but that doesn't mean that if you have like a high refresh monitor, you cannot connect it. You can, but via dongle, via like essentially Thunderbolt 3 to like DisplayPort dongle, something like that. Or if you have a monitor with USB-C, directly USB-C to USB-C essentially. And then if you need ray tracing, you would want to upgrade to M3 Pro generation essentially. Sometimes at this price bracket, you can also find MacBook Pro with M3 chip. Do not buy that abomination, guys. Since it doesn't have a Pro chip, you won't have benefits from Pro chip. You will not be able to connect more monitors to it. They removed one USB-C port from it, and that computer is generally not worth it. Especially don't buy this computer because it rewards Apple's brain-dead decision to create a computer that they called Pro with only 8 gigs of RAM and without a Pro chip in 2023. This is just atrocious. This is abomination. Do not buy. Especially because something like M1 Pro or M1 Max will be probably either comparable to the speed or even faster in some scenarios, and it will actually have extra features that come with upgraded Pro and Max chips. By the way guys, if you're finding this video helpful, please subscribe to Frytech channel. As you can see, it is still a small channel, but I'm trying to bring more and more helpful and interesting content to you, and I would really appreciate if you subscribe. Also, by the way, let me know so far which MacBooks are you aiming to buy right now. Okay, our next price bracket is between $1,500 and $2,000. At this price, you will be able to find both 14 and 16-inch models with M1 Pro, M2 Pro, M1 Max series of chips with upgraded RAM and SSDs. And at this point, I would just be trying to maximize your amount of storage and RAM. Once again, there are a lot of offers, there are a lot of deals both on Amazon and especially on eBay, so it's not going to be a problem whatsoever. Personally, right now, I would choose 16-inch MacBook Pro with M1 Max chip and like 32 gigs of RAM and 2 TB of storage. That's the model that I would go for. That would be essentially a replacement for this model, MacBook Pro 15-inch from 2015. And I bought this one simply because I didn't have money to buy like even M1 chip, because they were and they still are quite expensive where I live due to their scarcity. And I really didn't want dongles anymore, to be honest, so I chose this computer with SD card slot at least so I can make these videos. But if I had money today and if I could buy, I would buy M1 Max MacBook Pro. Our last price bracket is essentially above $2,000. If you are operating with this budget, I don't think that you are budgetary constrained anymore. And so my guide doesn't necessarily apply to you anymore because you can buy essentially whatever you want at this point. At this price bracket, you will be able to find Macs with like 2 TB of storage or even more way easier, just because it was quite a pricey option initially, so obviously even used ones will retail at a bit higher price. M1 Max or even M2 Max series of chips are quite easy to find below $2,500 essentially, and below $3,000 you could easily find models with 32 or even 64 gigabytes of RAM and 2 to 4 terabytes of storage. Both M1 Max, M2 Max, and then 14 and 16-inch display variants. Once again, if you need features like HDMI 2.1, a faster one, go for M2 series of chips. If you need ray tracing, if you know you're gonna be trying to like go into Blender, or maybe you're already doing it, Blender, 3D graphics, things like that, ray tracing is a really good option, so go for it. Go for upgraded M3 Pro or M3 Max chips. But if you don't need those features, I would first upgrade RAM and SSD before jumping to the newer generation of SoCs or system on a chip. Okay, so the overall guide. Start with M1 processor and a model according to your budget. Then check if you can upgrade RAM and SSD to something like 16 gigs and 512 respectively, or even more. Make sure that you don't really need or want those like features from Pro models like SD card, HDMI. Make sure that you can live without them, or the ability to connect more monitors or ray tracing. Make sure that you can live without those options. If not, go to the next step. Now look at MacBook Pros. If you think that M1 Pro processor or M2 processor will be enough for you, just try to upgrade RAM, just try to upgrade SSD and find the best deal you can for that model. If you can find a really good deal for a 2 TB model, go for it. Take it from the experience. If you are planning to do anything creative, if you're planning to do like videos, if you're planning to record music, things like that, you really want to have storage on your internal SSD. You don't really want to always carry like external stuff, external hard drive, external SSDs. It's always nice to have good amount of internal SSD space. Then if you understand that you're going to be making more videos, try to upgrade to M1 Max chips before switching to new generations, unless like we discussed previously, you need those like better new features like ray tracing or better HDMI. Because M1 Max chip is perfectly capable and it is still will be faster than M3 Pro chip in many situations, or will be very comparable to that chip, but probably at like half the price essentially. And like I mentioned before, in Max series of chips and actually Ultra series of chips, but they aren't present in MacBooks, there are extra encoding media engines, and so several apps can take advantage of that, speed up your exporting times and things like that. So Max series of chips can be very beneficial to certain people. If you think you are one of them, go for upgraded Max chips before you switch into generations at the same lineup like Pro lineup. There's also support for AV1 codec in M3 processor, but it is only for decoding, not encoding. So it means that you won't be able to hardware accelerate your exports in AV1. It's not even possible in M4, at least not in iPad right now, and we don't really know if that option AV1 encoding will actually even come with like M4 generation of Pro and Max processors. So it's kind of a useless feature right now because decoding AV1 is possible even on this 10 years old CPU. Without hardware acceleration, yes, but it still plays nicely, no problems whatsoever, and your newest shiny Macs will do it exactly the same without any problems. Okay guys, so that's basically our video for today. Once again guys, if I've convinced you to actually go for a used Apple computer, make sure to subscribe to Frytech channel, because my next video will be a guide how to buy a used Apple computer without getting screwed, what to check, how to test, what to test, and things like that. So make sure you are subscribed to Frytech channel so you don't miss that video. I will put the links into description and into a pinned comment as well. Once again, watch it. I'm going to be covering a lot of things, especially a few little details that many people don't even know and don't even think about. So that's just a teaser for you. Let me know in the comments which price bracket is basically the most interesting to you. Which MacBooks are you thinking about picking up? How much money essentially you want to spend right now on a MacBook? Thank you very much for taking your time and watching this video, spending this time with me and learning new things. I really appreciate this, guys. Let me know your thoughts and I'll see you in the next video real soon. Take care.